Move, Max. Find them. Right now. The dog didn't hesitate. Neither did she. And in that single moment before the smoke swallowed everything and the screaming started and the roof began to give, Sergeant Ashley Harper made the choice that would either save 23 lives or end her career. Possibly both. If you've never seen a military working dog run straight into a burning structure with nothing but a hand signal and trust you're about to, subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The explosion hit at 03:47. Ashley Harper was already awake. She was always already awake at that hour because Max was awake, and when Max was awake, something was wrong. She'd learned that 18 months ago at Kandahar, and she hadn't slept deeply since. She was lacing her boots when the ground shook. Not a tremor, not distant. A concussion that traveled up through the concrete floor of the kennel block and rattled the water bowls and set every single one of her 17 dogs off in one sustained collective alarm. Not barking. That wasn't the right word for what they did. It was something more coordinated than barking a layered rising declaration that every handler on base knew meant one thing. Real threat. Now. Ashley had her radio and her jacket before the second explosion came. She hit the door of the kennel block and nearly collided with Corporal Danny Reyes, who was running from the opposite direction with his boots unlaced and his face the color of chalk. "Fuel depot," he said. "The whole east line. 2 tanks confirmed. Staff sergeants calling for full evac base-wide." "How many in the east hangar?" Reyes blinked. Harper. "Danny. How many people were on overnight rotation in the east hangar?" He ran the number in his head. She could see him doing it, and she could see the moment he hit the answer and didn't want to say it. 23, maybe 25. Third shift maintenance crew plus the overnight avionics team. Ashley turned toward the east hangar. Reyes grabbed her arm. "Staff Sergeant Chen already called the order. Full evac. Nobody goes toward the fire. The hangar is between the depot and the flight line," she said. "If they don't know to go left, they're going to exit straight into the burn path. They don't have radio contact. I checked the overnight log last week. Their portable unit is dead." "That's not our problem. K9 units are not first response. You know the protocol." She was already walking. "Harper." His voice rose. "Ashley. Colonel Blake is going to be out here in 4 minutes, and if you're not at the rally point, then tell him where I am." She released Max first. That was the protocol breach that would later become the centerpiece of Colonel Richard Blake's formal complaint. Not that she'd entered a hazard zone without authorization, not even that she'd disobeyed a direct evacuation order, but that she had released a military working dog off-leash in an active emergency without command authorization. He would put that in writing. Twice. But right now, in the dark and the heat and the rolling orange glow that turned the Nevada sky the color of a wound, Max hit the ground running, and Ashley followed him at a dead sprint. And behind her, she heard the kennel block door crash open as Reyes scrambled to keep up. Max ran in silence. That was the first thing people who didn't understand working dogs always got wrong. They expected noise. The dogs were loudest when they were alerting at distance. Once they were on a problem, they went quiet. The silence was the signal. The silence meant, "I know exactly where I'm going." Max angled left of the hangar's main entrance, which told Ashley everything she needed to know about where the smoke was thickest. He was finding the edge of it, the breathable margin, the path that would give them the most time inside before the air turned poisonous. She keyed her radio. "This is Harper K9 Unit 7. I have visual on the east hangar. I'm making entry. I need someone to relay to the maintenance crew inside. If anyone has radio contact, tell them to stay low and move toward the north wall. Do not exit through the main south doors." Static. Then a voice she didn't recognize. "Unit 7, you are in violation of the evac order. Return to the rally point immediately." "Copy that," she said, and kept moving. The east hangar held C-130 components, spare avionics crates, and enough aviation fuel in pressurized lines running through the south wall to make every second inside a negotiation with probability. Ashley had done the walkthrough 6 weeks ago as part of a base security assessment that nobody had asked K9 units to participate in. She'd requested it herself, submitted the paperwork 4 times before someone rubber-stamped it, mostly to get her to stop submitting paperwork. She knew the interior layout better than most of the people assigned to work there. Max slipped through the north access door, which was partially blocked by a collapsed shelving unit, and Ashley went through behind him on her hands and knees. The smoke was dense, but not yet floor level. They had time minutes rather than seconds, but only if she was fast and the structure held. "Anyone in here?" Her voice carried differently in the smoke-flattened directionless. "Maintenance crew, avionics team, sound off. I'm coming to you." Nothing for 3 seconds. Then a cough. Male somewhere to her left. "Over here, we're over here. There's 6 of us." She moved toward the voice. Max moved with her shoulder against her knee, reading her speed and adjusting. They'd trained this for 2 years. Search and guide in compromised visibility bodies moving as a unit, the dog's nose doing what human eyes couldn't. The first group was huddled behind an equipment crate 20 feet from the north wall. 6 people, one of them supporting another, who'd taken something to the leg from flying debris. Sergeant First Class Donald Washington, she recognized him from the motor pool, was the one who'd called out. He had his arm around a younger airman who wasn't fully conscious. "Harper." Washington's voice cracked with something between relief and disbelief. "You're K9. "Yep." "They sent K9. "Nobody sent me. Can he walk?" Washington looked at the airman. "With help." "Then we move. North wall, single file, hand on the shoulder of the person in front of you. Max is going to walk point. Follow the dog, don't try to navigate yourself. You'll go in circles in this smoke. You understand me?" 6 heads nodded. "Move." She got them to the north door and handed them off to Reyes, who had arrived outside, and whose expression, when he saw 6 people emerge from a building he'd assumed was already a casualty, had not yet processed into actual words. "How many more?" he managed. 17 minimum." She turned back. "Keep this door clear." "Ashley, the roof?" "I know about the roof. Keep the door clear." She went back in. Done. The second group was harder. They'd moved, tried to evacuate through the south doors, exactly as she'd feared, realized the exit was blocked by fire, and retreated inward to the mezzanine level, which was accessible by a steel staircase, and was under normal circumstances the absolute last place you wanted to be in a structural fire. The smoke up there was different, thicker, angrier, the kind that didn't stay politely below your eyeline, but reached for your lungs like it had a personal grievance. Max found them by sound before Ashley could see them. He stopped, pointed with his whole body, ears up, and she followed his sightline up toward the mezzanine railing, where she could just barely make out the shapes of people pressed against the far wall. "I count 8, said a voice directly behind her. Ashley spun, standing 3 feet away in a flight suit, and with an expression that suggested he'd intended to be absolutely anywhere else tonight, was Colonel Richard Blake. He was holding a flashlight. He had not, as far as she could tell, brought anything else. No rescue equipment, no radio. Just himself and a flashlight, and the particular posture of a man who had decided that being present at a crisis was the same as managing it. She turned back toward the mezzanine. "The staircase is compromised. I need something to bridge the... Sergeant Harper." Blake's voice had the quality of a man who was choosing each word for the written record. "You are operating in direct violation of... Colonel, there are 8 people on that mezzanine, and the staircase is unstable. I need you to either help me get them down or get out of my way." Silence. In that silence, Max walked past both of them to the base of the staircase, put one paw on the first step, tested it, and looked back at Ashley. He was telling her it would hold. He'd felt it through his paw, the vibration, the give. She trusted this completely and irrationally and correctly. "It holds," she said. "Max up. Slow." The dog climbed the staircase, with the deliberate weight-testing care of something that understood structural engineering intuitively. He reached the top, and the 8 people on the mezzanine, who had been terrified and half certain they were going to die, saw a Belgian Malinois appear out of the smoke like a messenger from somewhere more competent than the situation they were in, and every single one of them moved toward him without being told to. That was the thing about dogs that Blake would never fully comprehend, no matter how many after-action reports he read. People in crisis moved toward dogs, not because they were trained to, but because something in the human brain, something older than military protocol and command structure, and the proper chain of authorization recognized that the dog knew something. "Follow the dog," Ashley called up. "Single file. Come down slow, hand on the railing." 8 people came down the staircase. The railing groaned on the 6th person. It held. Outside, the air tasted like a different world. Ashley sat on the pavement next to Max and let him drink from the water bottle Reyes had materialized from somewhere, and she counted heads for the 3rd time because she always counted 3 times, and the number was 23, which was the number it was supposed to be, and she let out a breath that had been gathering somewhere behind her sternum for the past 22 minutes. Blake emerged from the north door behind her. He looked at the 23 people sitting or lying on the pavement being assessed by the medical team that had arrived 7 minutes too late to be useful. He looked at the dogs, 5 of them now, because Reyes had brought in Bravo team's handlers to set a perimeter and assist with the final extraction. He looked at Ashley. She looked back. 23, she said. That's the full overnight roster. Blake said nothing. The south exit was blocked at the fuel line junction. If they'd followed the standard evac route, they would have walked directly into the burn path. She kept her voice flat, professional. The north access point was the only viable exit. Max found it. Reyes standing slightly behind Blake with the expression of someone watching a chess match where he couldn't see the board clearly enough to predict the outcome. Very quietly, said nothing. Blake cleared his throat. "Sergeant Harper, you will report to my office at 0800 for a formal debrief regarding your violation of standing evacuation protocol." "Yes, sir." "Your actions while—" He paused. The next word clearly cost him something. "Effective were conducted outside proper authorization and put both yourself and military assets at risk." Ashley looked at Max, who was still drinking unhurried present. "Military assets," she said. "The dogs are classified as military equipment under—" "I know what they're classified as, sir." She stood. "I'll be there at 0800. She walked away before he could build another sentence. Reyes fell into step beside her. He waited until they were out of earshot, which took longer than it should have because the man had a remarkable carrying voice when he was building toward his point. "He's going to file a report," Reyes said. "I know. He's going to make it ugly. I know that too. You just saved 23 people, Ashley, including Captain Rodriguez from Avionics, who I'm fairly certain is the Colonel's nephew-in-law." She stopped walking. "Is he?" "Second row of people on the mezzanine, the tall one." She processed this for a moment, then continued walking. "Doesn't change anything." "It might change something for Blake." "Maybe." She reached the kennel block door and paused with her hand on the latch. Or he doubles down because someone like him would rather be right than be grateful. "We'll find out at 0800. She let Max in first. He went directly to his crate, turned twice, and lay down with the certainty of an animal that had completed its work and had no remaining opinions about the paperwork. Ashley envied him that. She didn't sleep. She sat on the bench between the crate rows with her logbook open on her knees and wrote out everything she remembered. In sequence times decisions, structural observations, the precise moment Max had tested the staircase, because she had learned from a collection of experiences she didn't enjoy. Remembering that the official version of events was almost never the same as the true version, and that the only protection against the official version was having your own version written down in your own hand before anyone else's account solidified. Around 0530, the kennel block door opened, and General Patricia Cruz walked in. Ashley stood immediately. Cruz looked at the dogs. She looked at the logbook. She looked at Ashley with the particular attention of someone who had been in this branch long enough to recognize when she was looking at something she hadn't seen before and needed to understand fully before she decided what to do with it. At ease, Sergeant. Cruz moved down the crate row slowly, reading the identification cards on each crate, noting the breeds, the training designations, the handler assignments. 17 dogs. Yes, ma'am. And you ran them in there tonight? I ran Max in, ma'am. The others established perimeter and secondary exit coverage. Cruz stopped at Max's crate. The dog looked back at her with the unhurried confidence of an animal that had earned his opinion of people and was not about to recalibrate it for rank insignia. Colonel Blake filed his preliminary report 40 minutes ago, Cruz said. I expected that, ma'am. He's recommending a disciplinary review and a formal notation in your service record regarding willful violation of emergency protocol. Cruz turned to face her. He is also, it should be noted, struggling to explain how Captain Rodriguez is alive, given that Rodriguez was on the mezzanine level and the formal evac route was impassable. Ashley said nothing. I read your service jacket this morning, Cruz continued. Before I came here, something shifted in Ashley's chest. Not quite dread. Something more specific than that. 14 months at Kandahar, 7 at Bagram. A rotation in Somalia that apparently generated classified documentation I don't have clearance to pull in its entirety. Cruz's voice didn't change pitch or tempo. And a designation I've only seen on one other file in 15 years of command. Handler 7. The kennel block was very quiet. Max made a small sound in his crate. Not an alert, not a warning. Something acknowledgement-shaped, as if he recognized the name being said aloud in this space for the first time in a long time. I don't have an active designation, ma'am, Ashley said carefully. Ghost Pack was decommissioned. Yes, it was. Cruz held her gaze. The question I'm here to ask Sergeant Harper is whether it should have been. Ashley looked at her 17 dogs. She looked at the logbook in her hands. She thought about 23 people on the pavement, counting their own breathing, because it was still there to count. That's not a question I'm qualified to answer, ma'am. I didn't ask if you were qualified, Cruz said. I asked what you thought. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, not hostile. The kind of silence that meant both people in the room understood that whatever came next would matter, and were taking a moment to be sure about it. I think, Ashley said slowly, that what happened tonight is the least of what this unit can do. Cruz nodded once, looked at Max one more time. 0800, she said. Blake's office, I'll be there. She walked out. The kennel block door swung shut behind her, and in the quiet that followed, 17 dogs settled, not asleep, not restless, but present. Ready. Ashley sat back down on the bench and kept writing. The meeting in Blake's office started at 0803 seconds because Blake was the kind of man who believed that punctuality was a form of dominance, and he had arranged the chairs so that the one facing his desk had 4 inches less legroom than a standard seat and caught the full glare of the morning light through the east-facing window. Ashley sat in it with her logbook on her knee and her hands still. Blake sat behind his desk with a manila folder open in front of him and the satisfied posture of a man who had spent the night building something he intended to use. Captain Morrison from JAG sat to his left. A recording device sat on the corner of the desk, its red light already on. The chair beside Ashley was empty. Blake looked at it, looked at his watch, looked at the door, looked at General Cruz indicated she would be joining us, he said in the tone of a man who had expected that statement to carry more weight than it currently did. Yes, sir, Ashley said. 60 seconds passed. Blake straightened a paper on his desk. Morrison examined his own fingernails. Ashley watched the recording device's red light blink. The door opened. Cruz didn't knock. She walked in the way senior officers walk into rooms they technically don't need an invitation to enter, which is to say with the particular unhurried certainty of someone whose authority is not located in their posture, but is present nonetheless. Behind her came a man Ashley didn't recognize, mid-50s, Civilian clothes, a government ID badge clipped to his jacket that he turned inward as he sat, which was itself a kind of information. Colonel? Cruz sat. Begin. Blake opened his folder with the care of a man presenting evidence he believed was unassailable. Sergeant Harper, at 0347 this morning following the fuel depot incident, a base-wide evacuation order was issued under Emergency Protocol Delta. You received and acknowledged this order via radio communication at 0351. At 0353, you entered the East Hangar without authorization in direct contravention of... She acknowledged the order, Cruz said. Did she confirm compliance? Blake paused. The standard protocol assumes. Did she verbally confirm compliance, Colonel? Morrison leaned over and said something very quietly to Blake, who did not look at him. The radio log shows she said copy, Blake said. Which is acknowledgement of receipt, Cruz said. Not compliance confirmation. Continue. Blake's jaw moved slightly. Sergeant Harper released a military working dog into a hazard zone without command authorization in violation of MWD Deployment Protocol, Section 4 subsection. She saved 23 people, Cruz said, including one Captain Rodriguez, who I understand has already submitted a written statement to my office. Continue. The folder in front of Blake now had the quality of something that had been carefully constructed and was beginning to show its seams. He looked at Ashley directly for the first time. Do you have anything to say regarding your actions? I acted on assessment of immediate risk to personnel, sir. The standard evacuation route was compromised by fire at the fuel line junction. The north access point was viable. Max confirmed it. The dog confirmed it, Blake repeated. Yes, sir. You made a command decision based on a dog's behavior. I made a command decision based on 2 years of joint training, direct structural knowledge of the hangar layout from a security assessment I conducted 6 weeks ago, and real-time sensory information that Max was better positioned than any human in that situation to gather and communicate. Yes, sir. Blake looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Cruz. Then he looked at the man with the turned-in badge who had not said a single word and who was looking at Ashley with the quiet, unreadable attention of someone running a very specific calculation. Sir. Morrison touched Blake's arm, leaned in again. Blake sat back. The formal report stands. Disciplinary review notation in service record. That's my recommendation. Noted, Cruz said. She stood. I'm overriding it. The temperature in this room changed. Blake stood too, which was almost certainly a reflex. General, with respect, you don't have direct jurisdiction over. I have jurisdiction over everything on this base that I decide requires my jurisdiction, Colonel, and I've decided this requires mine. Cruz's voice had not gotten louder. That was the thing about her, she never got louder. The volume stayed exactly the same, and somehow the room got quieter around it. Sergeant Harper's service record will reflect a commendation for actions under emergency conditions. Her MWD deployment will be reviewed and formally endorsed as tactically sound given the circumstances. Your report will be filed in the archive. Blake stared at her. Are we clear? Cruz said. A long moment. Morrison was looking at the wall. The man with the badge was still looking at Ashley. We're clear, Blake said. The man with the badge caught up to her in the hallway outside. He moved faster than she'd expected for someone who'd spent an hour sitting perfectly still. Sergeant Harper. His voice was calibrated for hallways low enough not to carry clear enough to stop her without requiring her to ask him to repeat himself. My name is Caldwell. I'm with JSOC, Special Programs Division. She stopped. Turned. Sir. Not a sir. I'm civilian. He glanced down the hallway in both directions, not nervously but professionally, the way people do when they want to mark a conversation as one that doesn't need witnesses. I read your file this morning, the complete file. Ashley said nothing. Handler 7, Caldwell said. Ghost Pack Classified Operations Unit operational from 2018 to 2021. Decommissioned following the Paktika province operation. He paused. You were the only handler who came home. The hallway felt narrower than it had 60 seconds ago. That's in the classified file, she said. Yes, that's why I have a clearance. He studied her face. You've been at Edwards for 11 months, running a standard MWD unit, training dogs for base security and conventional deployment. He said the last two words the way someone might say minor inconvenience. That's a significant step down from what your record indicates you're capable of. My record is classified. I have the clearance, he said again simply. I also have a problem, and I think your dogs are the solution to it. She looked at him. What kind of problem? Caldwell reached into his jacket and produced a photograph. He held it where she could see it without handing it over, a calculated gesture she noted. Showing without giving. The photograph was grainy surveillance quality shot at distance. It showed a compound in what was clearly mountainous terrain, rocky ground, high altitude. And in the lower left corner of the frame, barely visible, a figure in civilian clothing who was too tall and too upright for a local national. Ashley's breath did a thing she didn't let reach her face. When? She said. 14 days ago, Kunar province. Caldwell put the photo away. He's alive. The question is for how long and under what terms. She turned and started walking. Harper. I need to see my dogs, she said. You can talk while I walk. Caldwell talked. He was good at it, economical, no decoration. The kind of briefing that prioritized information density over narrative smoothness. She appreciated that. She moved through the kennel block, checking water, checking paws, running the morning assessment with the automatic focus of someone who had learned that routine was not the opposite of urgency, but the foundation of it. Marcus Handler. 3 Ghost Pack. The man in the photograph had been listed as killed in action following the Paktika operation. The official record was clear on this. The family had been notified. There was a marker at Arlington. He's not dead, Ashley said. She wasn't asking. He's not dead, Caldwell confirmed. He was captured. The circumstances of that capture are still being reconstructed. What we know is that he's been in Taliban custody for approximately 22 months, held at a rotating series of compounds in Kunar and Nuristan provinces. The 14-day-old photograph puts him at a specific location we've been surveilling since. SEAL teams. 2 extractions attempted. Both aborted before breach. The compound has early warning systems. We don't fully understand. They knew we were coming before we were close enough to be detected by conventional means. He paused. Which is why I'm here. Ashley stopped at Max's crate. The dog was watching her with the patient full attention focus he used when he knew she was working through something important. Dogs, she said. The Taliban compound uses guard animals, not trained military working dogs, local animals, mixed breeds, feral adjacent. They respond to things human sentries miss. Caldwell's voice was careful. Both aborted extractions, the early warning came from the animal perimeter, not the human one. The SEAL team commanders think they need a dog handler who understands animal behavior well enough to read and counter it. They need someone who can work with the dogs that are already there, Ashley said. Not bring in new ones. Read the local animals. Understand what they're telling the compound. Caldwell was quiet for a moment. That's a more specific formulation than I had. But it's right. It's right. She opened Max's crate. He stepped out, sat, and looked up at her. She put her hand on his head. Not a command, not a signal. Just contact. Marcus was the best handler in Ghost Pack, she said. If he's alive after 22 months in Taliban custody, he's been doing something to stay useful to them. Which means they know he has value. Which means an extraction has a clock on it. We estimate 3 to 6 weeks before his value proposition changes, Caldwell said. After that, the risk calculus for keeping him shifts. The implication sat in the kennel block air between them. I need to see the full surveillance package, Ashley said. I need the terrain maps, the compound layout as best as you have it, and every piece of intelligence you've gathered on the animal behavior patterns around that perimeter. She looked at him. And I need to know who I'm working with, which SEAL team who's commanding, and whether they're going to listen to me or whether I'm going to spend the whole operation fighting both the Taliban and my own chain of command. Caldwell almost smiled. It didn't quite arrive, but the edge of it showed. That's a fair question. Do you have a fair answer? Commander Decker, SEAL Team 6 attachment. He's worked with K9 units before he has the most successful extraction record in the theater, and he's the one who specifically requested a Ghost Pack handler. Caldwell paused. He's also the one who pulled your classified file and found Handler 7. Ashley absorbed this. He knew about Ghost Pack. He was on the Kandahar operation in 2019. He saw what your team did. A beat. He said finding you was the only part of this plan he was confident about. She didn't let that land anywhere visible. I'll need 2 weeks minimum to review the intelligence and run preparation protocols with my team. You have 10 days. That's not enough. It's what the timeline allows. She looked at Max. He looked back. He was not going to tell her what to decide. He was going to wait and be ready and trust that she knew what she was doing, which was, she thought, the most demanding kind of faith, because it offered no pressure and no excuse. All right, she said. 10 days. General Cruz was waiting in her office when Ashley got there, which meant Cruz had anticipated the route of the conversation with Caldwell and had decided to be in position before Ashley arrived, which was exactly the kind of thing that made Cruz formidable. Close the door, Cruz said. Ashley closed it. Caldwell talked to you. He did. And Ashley sat. I'm going. Cruz studied her for a moment. Marcus was your team. He was my team. You've had 11 months here. You've built something with these dogs that I didn't think was possible in that time frame. Cruz leaned forward. If this goes wrong, Marcus is dead, and so am I, and the program is over before it starts. Ashley kept her voice level. If it goes right, we bring home a man the Army already buried, and Ghost Pack proves it was never just a classified experiment. Cruz was quiet. Ma'am, Ashley said. He's been alive for 22 months. Every day I'm not moving is a day someone else is paying for. Cruz tapped her finger on the desk once. Twice. The gesture of someone making a decision they've already made and are confirming, not exploring. What do you need from me? She said. Authorization to pull 3 of my handlers for pre-deployment training. Equipment requisition outside standard channels. Caldwell will have the specifics. And... Ashley paused. A conversation with Colonel Blake. Cruz raised an eyebrow. Not the conversation I'd like to have, Ashley clarified. The conversation that gets him out of the way without creating a paper trail that follows this operation. She met Cruz's eyes. You know what he's going to do when he finds out K9 is running an active combat advisory role. He's going to file every form he can find and copy every superior he has access to. Leave Blake to me, Cruz said. I wasn't sure you'd want the involvement, ma'am. I've been managing Richard Blake's particular brand of institutional self-preservation for 6 years. Cruz's expression held something that was not quite humor, but lived in the same neighborhood. I have a system. She ran the team that afternoon. All 17 dogs, full assessment, the kind of session that looked to an outside observer like a standard training evolution, and was in fact Ashley checking each animal against a specific internal rubric she'd been developing since Kandahar: capacity for independent action, response to novel stimulus, tolerance for compromised conditions. The particular combination of drive and restraint that made the difference between a dog that was useful in a controlled environment and one that could operate where control was a memory. 5 of the 17 had it. She'd known this for months. She watched them move through the assessment drills with the critical, affectionate attention of someone who loved what she was watching and needed it to be extraordinary. Max, Delta, Kira, Rook, Ghost. She'd named the last one Ghost without entirely meaning to in the first week after his arrival, when he'd moved through an obstacle course so quietly that 2 senior handlers hadn't seen him complete it until she pointed him out. He'd been watching her now for 40 minutes with the particular stillness that she associated with dogs, that understood more about a situation than they were supposed to. "I know," she said to him. Reyes appeared beside her. He'd been timing the drills because she'd asked him to, and he had a clipboard with numbers on it that she hadn't asked him to bring, but was glad he had. "Kira's obstacle time is down 4 seconds from last week," he said. "Rook's bite pressure calibration is still slightly off on the release command. Ghost." He looked at the dog. Ghost is perfect, which is unsettling. He's not perfect. He's ready. Ready for what? Reyes looked at her sideways. "And who was the man with the badge this morning?" "Government contractor," she said, which was true enough. "And the general who overrode Blake? You know who she is, Danny." "I know her name. I don't know what's happening." He kept his voice low. Not scared, Reyes didn't do scared, but careful. The voice of a man who understood he was standing at the edge of something larger than the kennel block. "Talk to me." She looked at him. He'd been her corporal for 11 months. He'd been the one who'd run toward the burning hangar because she ran toward it, and he wasn't the kind of man who let his people go alone into something like that. He was 26 years old and had more instinctive operational sense than most people twice his age, and he did not deserve to be managed. "I'm going to Afghanistan," she said. 10 days from now. Advisory role with a SEAL extraction team." She held his gaze. "I can't tell you why, but I need you to run this unit while I'm gone, and to do it exactly as if nothing has changed, because nothing officially will have." Reyes was quiet for 3 full seconds. Someone's alive who isn't supposed to be. She didn't confirm it. She didn't have to. "You need me here or there." "Here," she said. "The dogs need continuity. And if something goes sideways, I need someone who knows this unit well enough to protect it." "Protect it from what?" She looked toward Blake's office building across the compound. The lights on the second floor were still on. "From the kind of people," she said, "who don't understand what they're looking at until it's already saved their lives, and even then find a reason to resent it." Reyes followed her gaze. "Understood. How many are going with you?" "None of mine," she said. "This one I do with what's there." He absorbed that. It cost him something she could see it. The idea of her going in without her own animals into terrain she didn't know, reading dogs she'd never worked with. "Then come back," he said. "That's your only order from me." She picked up the assessment clipboard from his hands. "You can't give me orders, Danny. You're a corporal." "I'm aware of my rank, Sergeant. Come back anyway." She almost smiled. Not quite. She turned back toward the dogs and watched Ghost move through the final drill, silent, purposeful, exactly where he needed to be. 10 days. Marcus, somewhere in the mountains of Kunar, 22 months gone and counting. She started planning. The flight to Bagram took 14 hours, and Ashley spent 11 of them studying the surveillance package Caldwell had given her on a secured tablet that would wipe itself if she entered the wrong pin 3 times. She didn't sleep. She'd learned in Kandahar that sleep on a transport was a luxury that felt like a right until the moment you needed your mind sharp on the other end, and she couldn't afford dull edges on this one. The compound intelligence was thorough in the ways that mattered least, and thin in the ways that mattered most. She had structural layouts, estimated personnel counts, weapons assessments, sightline calculations. What she didn't have was a detailed behavioral map of the animal perimeter, which dogs were stationed, where, what their trigger patterns were, how they communicated alert status to each other and to the human sentries. The 2 previous extraction attempts had generated field notes, but the notes read like they'd been written by men who understood the dogs as obstacles rather than as a system, and that was the gap that had cost both missions their window. She read the field notes 3 times. Then she turned the tablet off and spent the remaining 3 hours thinking about how a dog decides that something in the dark is worth waking the house for and what you do if you need it not to. Commander Decker met her on the tarmac at Bagram. He was shorter than she'd pictured from Caldwell's description, compact, economical, in his movements with the particular physical stillness of someone who spent a lot of time in situations where unnecessary motion was its own kind of announcement. He had a scar along his jaw that had healed cleanly, and 2 days of beard and eyes that went over her once quickly, with the assessment speed of someone who had learned to read people fast because the alternative was expensive. "Handler 7, he said. "Sergeant Harper's fine." "Harper." He didn't offer his hand, not unfriendly, just efficient. "Decker, you read the package?" "On the flight. I have questions." "Good. I have answers for some of them." He turned and walked, expecting her to match his pace, which she did. "The others I'm hoping you have answers for, which is why you're here." They moved through the base with the purposeful speed of people who had things to accomplish before a clock she couldn't see finished counting down. Decker talked while he walked, and Ashley listened with the specific attention she reserved for briefings where the texture of what was being said told you as much as the content. "2 teams tried the compound," Decker said. "First team got within 400 meters before the animal perimeter activated. They described it as," he paused slightly, "a cascade. 1 dog, then 3, then the whole outer ring in about 90 seconds. By the time the sentries were up, we'd lost the window." "What was the approach vector?" "Southeast following the dry riverbed, lowest profile approach." "The wind was coming from which direction?" He glanced at her. "Northwest." Then they walked their scent directly into the animal perimeter before they were close enough to see the compound. She kept her voice matter-of-fact. Those dogs weren't responding to sound or sight. They were already tracking the team by the time the team thought they were invisible. Decker was quiet for 3 paces. "The second team. Same outcome, different approach vector, northeast, higher ground." "What time of approach?" 0200. "Later than the first, by 90 minutes. Animals are lighter sleepers between 02 and 04, REM cycles. If the local dogs have any conditioning to human presence at night, even neutral conditioning, just experience of nighttime movement, their baseline alertness in that window is higher." She looked at him. "Your teams are picking the approaches that make tactical sense for human movement. They're not accounting for how the perimeter reads human movement." Decker stopped walking. He turned and looked at her with the full attention that he'd been rationing up until now. "That's not in any of the field notes." "The field notes were written by people watching the dogs fail them. I'm reading the dogs." She held his gaze. "If you want this to work, I need to run the approach planning. Not advise on it. Run it." The silence between them lasted exactly long enough to mean something. "That's what Caldwell told me you'd say," Decker said. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes." He started walking again. "My team is going to push back." "I know. They've done 47 successful extractions. They're not accustomed to restructuring their approach for a K9 consultant." "I'm not a consultant," Ashley said. "Caldwell sent me here because 2 of your 47 didn't work, and the reason both of them didn't work is standing between you and bringing your man home. I need your team to understand that I'm not here to manage their egos. I'm here to manage the perimeter." Decker almost smiled. The scar along his jaw shifted slightly. "I'll introduce you." There were 6 of them in the briefing space. The core extraction team, the people who would be inside the wire when everything mattered. They received her with the particular professional courtesy of elite operators who had been told to receive someone professionally and had decided to honor the letter of that instruction while reserving judgment on the spirit of it. Petty Officer First Class Garrett was the largest person in the room, and also she would learn the one with the most experience working alongside K9 units in conventional operations. He looked at her with something that was not quite skepticism and not quite openness, a held position waiting. Chief Santos had the field notes from both aborted extractions spread on the table in front of him, and was looking at them when she walked in as though they might say something different if he looked long enough. He was the one who'd written them. She knew this because the writing had a specific quality. Precise frustrated the notes of someone who knew they'd missed something and couldn't identify what. The other 4 were names she'd memorized from the package: Rodriguez, Kim Thatcher, Osei. And they watched her with the collective attention of people who were going to listen because Decker had told them to listen, and were going to decide for themselves what they thought about what they heard. The compound uses a mixed animal perimeter, she said without preamble, because preamble was for people who needed time to establish credibility, and she didn't have time. Based on the behavioral cascades documented in your field notes, I estimate 8 to 12 animals in the outer ring, with a smaller number, probably 3 to 4, in closer proximity to the main structure. The outer animals are the early warning system. The inner animals are the response trigger. Santos looked up from his notes. The response trigger. When the inner animals activate, that's when the human sentries move. Your field notes describe a 90-second cascade from first alert to full sentry deployment. That 90 seconds is not the window you've been trying to exploit. It's already too late. The real window is the 30 seconds before the first dog alerts. She looked around the room. You've been planning for the alarm. I'm going to help you plan to not be the alarm. Garrett leaned forward. And you can do that. Manage 12 dogs you've never worked with in terrain you've never been in at 0200. I can read them, she said. I can anticipate their triggers and route around them. And I can tell your team in real time what the animal perimeter is telling me. She paused. What I can't do is guarantee zero activation. What I can do is get you inside that 30-second window instead of outside it. What's the difference? Kim said between 30 seconds and 90. The difference, Ashley said, is Marcus. The room was quiet. Santos looked down at his field notes. He picked up the top page, read something on it, put it back down. In the first attempt, right before the cascade started, he looked at her. I wrote that one of the outer dogs moved before the others, moved toward the southeast and then stopped. I thought it was random. It wasn't random. It was triangulation. They do it in 2s and 3s. One moves to refine the scent angle while the others hold position. If you'd seen that movement as a warning instead of noise, you'd have had an additional 15 seconds. She looked at him steadily. You documented it correctly. You just didn't have the framework to read it. Santos held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned the field notes face down on the table. A deliberate gesture. Okay, he said. Tell us the framework. She worked with them for 6 days. The days had a rhythm that she imposed, and they adapted to faster than she'd expected. Morning intelligence review. Midday approach. Simulation. Evening debrief, where she made them describe every animal behavioral observation from the surveillance feeds, and she annotated, corrected, reframed. She drove them hard, and they pushed back, and she held her ground on the things that mattered and conceded on the things that didn't. And by day 3, Garrett had stopped watching her with the held position expression, and had started watching her the way her own handlers watched Max, with the specific attention of someone who had decided that what they were looking at was worth following. On day 4, the surveillance feed delivered something new. Santos found her at 0200. She was awake, which didn't surprise him anymore, and put his tablet on the table in front of her without a word. On the screen, the compound's nighttime feed. And, in the lower left corner, the same location as the original photograph, a figure moving across the compound's interior, not being escorted, moving independently, with the specific deliberate gait of someone who had learned exactly how far they could move without triggering attention. Ashley watched the figure for 30 seconds. Her face did not move. He's doing recon, she said. Santos sat down slowly. Inside his own captivity. He's been in there 22 months. He knows that compound better than anyone who guards it. She watched the figure stop at a specific point along the interior wall and then reverse direction and return to the structure. He's measuring something, distance or material or... She stopped. He's been tracking the dogs. The guard dogs. He's a handler. It's what he does. It's what we all do. We read the animals around us. She kept watching the feed. The figure had returned inside, gone. He knows the animal perimeter better than your surveillance does. He's been living inside it for almost 2 years. Santos looked at her. If we could communicate with him, we can't. She said it flat because flat was the only way to say it without letting something else into her voice. But we don't need to. He's going to do something with what he's learned. Whatever he's planning, whatever he's been building toward in there, we need to be in position when he moves. That changes the timeline. That changes everything, she said. We don't plan around our window anymore. We plan around his. Santos stared at the empty compound feed for a long moment. Decker's not going to like restructuring the timeline 6 days in. No, Ashley said. He's not. She stood and went to get Decker. Decker did not like it. He was precise and controlled about not liking it, which was in some ways harder to be in a room with than someone who simply got loud. He sat with the new intelligence in front of him and went through it twice, and then sat back and looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man performing a very fast internal recalculation on a very complex set of variables. You're telling me we coordinate our extraction around a signal from a man we have no communication with, he said. Whose signal we can't predict, whose timing we can't confirm, and whose plan, if he has one, we have no knowledge of. I'm telling you he's going to create a window, Ashley said. Because he's been 22 months in that compound watching and building towards something, and the movement on that feed is someone who's ready. We need to be ready when he is. And you know this because I trained with him for 3 years. Because I know how Marcus thinks. She held Decker's gaze. And because when I was Handler 7, he was the only person in Ghost Pack who understood the dogs the way I did. He didn't just train them, he listened to them. He's been listening to the compound's animals for 22 months. Whatever he's planning uses them. The room was quiet. Outside, somewhere distant, a vehicle on the base road. The fluorescent light above them humming its single note. If we wait for his signal and we miss it, Decker said, he's gone. If we go in on our own timeline, we hit the animal perimeter, we blow the window, and he's gone anyway. Except this time they know we tried. She didn't look away. I know what I'm asking you to trust. I know it's not in any protocol you've worked from. But he's alive because he's been operating on instinct and intelligence inside an environment that should have killed him, and he is the best prepared asset we have for this extraction. We just can't talk to him. Decker looked at Garrett. Garrett looked at Santos. Santos had his field notes out again right side up now, and was looking at the page where he documented the dog that moved before the others. He's going to make the first dog move, Santos said quietly. It wasn't a question. He's going to make all of them move, Ashley said. In the right direction, and in that moment, we go. Decker pressed his hands flat on the table, held them there, the gesture of a man grounding himself before a decision. How long do we wait? He said. He moved on that feed at 0214. If the pattern holds, he's in a preparation phase. 48 hours, maybe 72. She paused. We stage tomorrow. We're in position by the following night. And if he doesn't move, then we reassess. She met his eyes. But he'll move. Decker looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he stood. Stage tomorrow. Brief the full team at 1800. He picked up his folder. At the door he stopped, didn't turn. Harper. Sir? You said you trained with him for 3 years. His voice was careful. How well do you know him? She thought about Marcus, his laugh which was always slightly delayed because he found things funny a beat after everyone else and didn't pretend otherwise. The way he handled a dog which was patient to the point of appearing lazy until the moment the dog needed him to be fast. The way he'd looked at her on the last day before Paktika, which she had replayed so many times, it had worn smooth like a stone in water until she couldn't be sure anymore whether she was remembering or reconstructing. Well enough, she said. Decker nodded, left. She sat alone in the briefing room with the surveillance feed still running on Santos's tablet, the compound dark and still. And she looked at the spot where Marcus had stood 2 nights ago and calculated the distance between where she was and where he was and how many things between here and there could go wrong, and how many of them she could control. She thought about what she'd told Reyes. Come back, that's your only order. She thought about what it meant to walk into something built entirely on trust. Trust in a man she hadn't seen in 2 years. Trust in dogs she'd never handled. Trust in a team that had taken 6 days to stop watching her like a variable and start treating her like an asset. She thought about Paktika, about the last confirmed position of Ghost Pack before everything came apart, about the official report that said Marcus was gone. He'd been alive the whole time, 22 months. And in all that time, she realized she had never fully believed the report. She had known it was wrong the way you know something in your body, rather than your mind. Not evidence, not reasoning, just the absolute cellular certainty that a person you know well is still in the world. She'd been right. The question now was whether she was right about the rest of it. She closed the tablet, sat in the dark for exactly 2 minutes, and then went to find Santos and start building the staging plan. The staging position was 40 minutes from the compound on foot, and they reached it at 21:40, with enough darkness left to matter, and enough time to settle in and stop generating the kind of small, unnecessary sounds that distance compressed into signal. Ashley lay still and listened, not to the team around her, Decker to her left, Santos and Garrett behind the others, spread in a containment arc that Decker had agreed to reposition based on her animal perimeter mapping. She listened past all of that, past the wind and the distant sound of the valley and the particular quality of mountain silence that wasn't silence at all, but a texture of small noises that told you exactly what kind of night you were in. She was listening for the dogs. At this distance, she couldn't hear them directly, but she could hear what changed when they changed the birds that adjusted their nighttime patterns, when ground-level predator anxiety spiked the way certain insects stopped, when something larger than expected moved through a space. The compound's animal perimeter was a language, and the language had an accent. She'd been studying for 6 days, and she was reading it now the way you read something you know well, not word by word, but in whole meanings. So far, the compound said nothing yet. Decker's voice came through the earpiece at a volume designed for her alone. Status. Holding, she said. We've been holding for 90 minutes. I know. A pause. The team is solid, but 90 minutes in a staging position is a long time to ask, Decker. She kept her voice flat and low. When it starts, it will move fast. I need the team fresh when it does not already committed. Hold position. He didn't answer, which was his version of compliance. She went back to listening. It was Santos who almost broke first, and she understood it. He was a man who processed tension through action, who had spent 6 days of preparation replacing the anticipated momentum of 2 failed missions, and the waiting was working on him in ways he couldn't fully manage. She heard his breathing change at the 2-hour mark, heard him shift his weight in a way that was controlled but not completely. Santos, she said barely above a whisper. I'm good. I know, stay good. Another 10 minutes of nothing that felt like something building. And then she heard it. Not from the compound. From the western edge of the compound's outer ring where 2 of the guard animals had been stationed in a pattern she'd mapped from the surveillance feeds. A shift. Not an alert, almost the opposite of an alert. A deliberate settling, a change in the ambient anxiety that she'd been tracking for 90 minutes, as though something had moved through the perimeter that the dogs had decided to let pass. Let pass. Not failed to detect. Decided. Her chest tightened. He's moving, she said. Decker's voice sharpened immediately. Confirm. The western dogs just stood down from a contact. Something moved through them and they let it through. She was already recalculating the movement vectors in her head. He knows those animals. He walked right through them. He's outside the inner perimeter. That's not possible, Garrett said. The compound wall. He found a way over it or under it, and he's been planning it for weeks, and right now, he's in the gap between the inner and outer perimeter, and that gap is going to close in about 4 minutes when the outer dogs re-establish their patrol pattern. She was moving as she spoke, and the team moved with her because Decker had already said, go, and she could hear him breathing differently. Now the focused, contracted breathing of someone running on full operational adrenaline. We come in from the north. I need everyone to match my pace exactly. If I stop, you stop. If I change direction, you change direction without asking why. Do you understand me? 6 confirmations in her ear. She moved. The outer perimeter dogs did not alert. She heard one of them, the large mixed breed she'd identified from the feeds, as the eastern anchor of the outer ring track. Their movement with a soft postural shift that she felt rather than heard, the way you feel someone's attention in a dark room. She altered their angle by 15 degrees without breaking stride and felt the attention release. Garrett's voice in her ear, breathless and low. "How did you know to—" "Later," she said. They were inside the outer ring. The inner ring was different. The inner animals were closer to the structure, more conditioned to human proximity, and had a faster trigger response as a result. Ashley had been thinking about this specific problem for 4 days, and her solution was not elegant. It was simply true. The inner animals would respond to confidence. Animals always responded to confidence because confidence smelled like familiarity, and familiarity smelled like safety. And if you moved through a space like you belonged in it, you changed the message your body sent before you'd taken 5 steps. She slowed to a walk, deliberate, even. Behind her, she heard the team register the change in pace and adjust, and felt the moment when Decker understood what she was doing and trusted it, because his breathing didn't spike and he didn't ask. An inner dog, she could hear it now, close 8 feet. Maybe made a low sound that was not quite a growl, not threat. Inquiry. "Who are you?" Ashley made a sound back. Very low, very specific. A frequency she'd spent years learning, the kind of communication that didn't translate into human language, because it wasn't built from language. It was built from the same ancient negotiation that every domesticated dog and every human who'd ever learned to really listen had been running for 10,000 years. The dog was quiet. They moved. Tall. Marcus was 17 feet from the compound's north wall when Ashley saw him. She almost stopped walking. She didn't, because stopping was the wrong thing, because she needed to keep moving, and keep the team moving, and keep the animal perimeter quiet. But something in her chest did something that had nothing to do with operational focus, and everything to do with the fact that the man she'd believed was dead for 22 months was standing 17 feet away, and he was upright, and he was moving, and he was alive. He saw her at the same moment. She watched his body do what hers had almost done. The arrest of motion, the flash of something enormous crossing his face, and then the operational override, the same training and instinct closing over it, and he was moving again, and so was she. They reached each other in the space between the wall and the outer ring. 7, he said. His voice was rough and low, and it sounded like someone who had been careful with words for a long time and was still being careful even now. 3, she said. His face. She hadn't fully prepared for his face, not what it would look like, but what it would do to her to see it. Thinner. Older in a specific way that wasn't about years, but about the weight of specific days. A scar above his left eye that she didn't recognize. But his eyes were the same, the particular clear, unhurried attention that had made him the best handler she'd ever worked alongside. "How many with you?" he said. 6. SEAL Team 6 attachment. Decker's leading. Marcus looked past her and found Decker, who had approached to within 4 feet and was looking at Marcus with the expression of a man who had planned this moment in operational terms and was now experiencing it in human ones. "Commander," Marcus's voice was steady. "We need to move. They do a check rotation at 0245. We have 11 minutes. "Can you run?" Decker said. Marcus looked at him. "I've been running in my head for 22 months. Let's find out if the rest of me kept up." And he could run. Not full speed, not yet 22 months of captivity did specific things to a body's reserves. But he moved with purpose, and he moved without help, and he moved in a direction that was away from the compound, which was the only direction that mattered. Ashley ran beside him. She wasn't assigned to him. Garrett had taken the position on his left, which was the correct tactical placement, and Santos was running rear security, and the formation was exactly what Decker had drilled. But she stayed beside him because she needed to hear him breathing, and she was not entirely sure she could have explained to anyone why that was operationally necessary, and she didn't try. "The outer dogs," Marcus said low between breaths. "How did you get through them?" "I read the surveillance feeds for 6 days." "You read them or you understood them?" "Understood them." She glanced at him. "You conditioned the Western pair." He was quiet for 2 strides. "Took me 4 months." "What did you use?" "Food scraps for my meals. Patience." Another stride. "And the fact that they were bored. Guard animals get bored. Boredom makes them negotiable." "That's what I told Decker's team." She watched his footing. He was compensating slightly on the right leg. She didn't say anything about it. He was moving. "They didn't fully believe me until about day 3. Marcus made a sound that was the compressed, ragged shadow of the laugh she remembered. "How is that different from every briefing Ghost Pack ever gave?" She almost said something else. Didn't. Saved it. Dud. They were 40% of the way to the extraction vehicle when the compound's check rotation hit early. She knew it before the team did because the inner dogs told her a sudden, sharp collective change in the ambient silence, the sound shape of animals responding to an alarm being raised inside the structure rather than outside it. "They're early," she said. Decker didn't waste time asking how she knew. "Double time. Santos rear security weapons free if contacted. Garrett on Marcus, do not let him fall behind. Harper." "I'm on the perimeter. Keep moving." She dropped back 2 steps to run beside the rear of the formation. The outer dogs were responding now to the internal alarm. She could hear the cascade starting the same pattern Santos had documented in his field notes, moving around the compound's edge toward the direction of their exit. But it was moving wrong. She processed this in 3 seconds. The cascade was moving away from them, not tracking their direction, but circling back toward the compound's south side. Marcus. He'd done something conditioned, something left, something in place before he moved, that was now pulling the animal response in the wrong direction for the compound and the right direction for them. "He laid a false trail," she said into the earpiece. "Before he moved. The outer dogs are tracking it. We have maybe 4 minutes before they reorient." "4 minutes is enough," Decker said. "Move." They moved. The extraction vehicle was where it was supposed to be, and the driver had the engine running, and Garrett had Marcus in the vehicle before the door was fully open, and then everyone was in and moving, and the compound was behind them and getting further behind them with every second, and Ashley sat in the vehicle and felt her hands shaking for the first time since she'd entered the staging position 3 hours ago. She pressed them flat on her knees, looked straight ahead. Marcus across from her was looking at his own hands. He turned them over palms up and looked at them for a long moment, with the expression of a man reacquainting himself with something he'd been uncertain he'd ever see again. 22 months, he said, quietly. Not to her specifically. To whatever was in the space between where he'd been and where he was now. "We can debrief at Bagram," Decker said. "I know." Marcus lowered his hands, looked at Decker. "The compound has intelligence value you'll want. I've been memorizing it for a long time." He paused. "I wasn't sure anyone was coming, but I kept memorizing it anyway." "Why?" Garrett said. Marcus looked at him steadily. "Because if they came, I wanted to earn my extraction. And if they didn't..." A pause. "It gave me something to do that wasn't giving up." The vehicle hit a rough stretch of road, and everyone absorbed it in silence and kept moving. Ashley looked at Marcus. He looked back at her. Between them, 22 months and a weight that was too large for the vehicle they were sitting in, and too important to leave behind. "You knew I'd come," she said. Not a question. "I knew if anyone found the file they'd find you," he said. "And I knew if they found you, you'd come." His voice was level. "I counted on it. I don't know if that's fair." "It's fair," she said. "The dogs." He looked at her with the specific attention she remembered, the kind that meant he was asking something real, not filling space. "You still have Max." "Still have Max." Something in his face. Not quite relief, something that had been held under tension for a very long time and was very slowly beginning to release. "Good dog," he said. "The best," she said. "Yo." The debrief at Bagram lasted 6 hours, and Marcus sat through it with the controlled, methodical patience of someone who had organized this information in his head for months, and was now transferring it with the precision of a man who understood its value and wanted it to land correctly. Decker ran the debrief. Ashley sat in the corner and watched Marcus talk and did not try to account for what was happening in her chest because there was no operational category for it, and she had learned long ago that some things were better processed after the mission than during. At the end of the 6th hour, when the last intelligence officer had asked the last question and stepped out, Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. "Who filed the KIA report?" he said. The room had 3 people left in it. Ashley, Decker, and Caldwell, who had flown in from Bagram's admin side when word of the successful extraction reached him, and who had been sitting in the corner with the expression of a man who had bet significant professional capital on this outcome and was experiencing the specific relief of having won. Decker looked at Caldwell. Caldwell looked at Marcus. "The report was filed by your commanding officer at the time," Caldwell said. "Colonel Hargrove, based on the intelligence assessment following Paktika." Marcus was quiet. "Hargrove knew I wasn't confirmed dead. The body was never recovered." "No," Caldwell said. "It wasn't." "Then he filed the report based on incomplete intelligence." Another silence. A different quality than the ones before. Decker had gone very still. Ashley watched Marcus's face and saw the thing that had been held beneath the surface of his operational composure for the past 6 hours begin to surface. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, more deliberate. "Why?" Marcus said. "Would a commanding officer file a confirmed KYA report for a handler whose body was never recovered and whose last known position was a Taliban-controlled province with active prisoner-taking history?" Nobody answered, because nobody in the room needed to. The answer was in the question. It had been in the question for 22 months in a compound in Kunar province, while Marcus memorized intelligence and conditioned guard dogs and held himself together against an explanation that was too ugly to say out loud without evidence. "He knew," Ashley said. Marcus looked at her. "Hargrove knew you were alive," she said. Her voice was very steady. "And he filed the report anyway." The room absorbed this. Outside the base was running its normal operational rhythm, indifferent to the specific gravity of what was happening in this room. The weight of a truth that had been waiting 22 months to be said in the presence of people with the authority to do something about it. Decker looked at Caldwell. "Is there documentation?" "There will be," Caldwell said, in the voice of a man who had been building toward exactly this moment and had the patience to have built it correctly. "I've had a parallel investigation running since we confirmed Marcus was alive. Hargrove's communication records from the weeks following Paktika have inconsistencies." He paused. "Several significant ones." Marcus turned and looked at the wall. He sat with this for a moment that belonged to him, and nobody else in the room tried to fill it. Then he turned back. "I want to be part of the process," he said. "Whatever comes next, whatever investigation, whatever testimony, I want to be in the room." "You'll be in the room," Caldwell said, "and Ghost Pack." Marcus looked at Ashley. The question was for her, even though Caldwell was the one who could answer it. Because it was her program, as much as it was anything else. Her animals, her protocols, her 11 months at Edwards building something that everyone had dismissed until it saved 23 lives in a burning hangar. She looked back at him. "Cruz authorized the revival," she said. "Before I left. The program is active. For the first time since the vehicle, something in Marcus's face released completely. Not the soldiers' controlled relief. Something more personal than that. The expression of a man who had kept something alive inside himself through 22 months of captivity, because giving it up would have meant giving up the version of himself that mattered, and was now learning that what he'd kept alive was still there on the outside too, waiting for him. "Then I'm back," he said. "You're back," she said. Decker looked between them with the expression of a man who understood he was in the presence of something that had preceded him by years and would outlast the current operation by decades, and had the good sense not to put words to it. He stood. "I'll let you debrief each other," he said. "Caldwell, I need the investigation documentation in my hands before 0600. He left. Caldwell left. The door closed. Ashley and Marcus sat across from each other in the empty briefing room, and the silence between them was completely different from every other silence in the past 6 hours. Not operational, not weighted, not strategic. Just the silence of two people who had been in the same unit and then on opposite sides of an unsurvivable event and had somehow ended up in the same room again. "I thought you were dead," she said. "For about a week." "Only a week. Then I stopped believing the report." She looked at him steadily. "I didn't have evidence. I just knew." Marcus was quiet. "That's the thing about Ghost Pack," he said. "We spent 3 years learning to trust what we knew before we could prove it." He paused. "The dogs taught us that." "Yeah," she said. Outside somewhere on the base, a vehicle started. Someone running late or running early, or just running toward whatever the next thing was. The operational world continuing its operational business, unaware that in this room something had been recovered, that it had declared lost. Ashley thought about Reyes. About 17 dogs in a kennel block at Edwards, waiting with the patient readiness of animals that understood they were part of something larger than the current moment. She thought about Max and what he would do when Marcus walked through the kennel block door. Dogs remembered. Not the way humans remembered, not in narrative, not in the language of before and after, but in the body, in the nose, in the absolute cellular recognition of a person who had been present and was present again. Max would know him immediately. That thought, for reasons she could not have fully articulated, was the one that finally let something in her chest release all the way. "When we get back," she said, "Max is going to lose his mind." Marcus smiled. The full version of it, the one she remembered. "Good," he said. "I've missed that dog." They landed at Edwards at 11:40 on a Tuesday, which was an ordinary time on an ordinary day for everyone on the base who didn't know what had been on that transport. Reyes knew. He was standing on the tarmac when the aircraft stopped moving, and he had the particular stillness of someone who had been waiting in a specific way, not impatiently, but with the focused, held quality of a man who had been carrying something heavy for 10 days and was about to find out if he'd been carrying it correctly. Ashley came down the ramp first. He looked at her face, and his shoulders dropped half an inch. "You're in one piece," he said. "I told you to keep the door clear," she said. "I didn't tell you to meet the transport." "I kept the door clear. Then I came to meet the transport." His eyes went to the ramp behind her, and Marcus appeared at the top of it, and Reyes went very still for a second, in the way people do when they see something they'd been told was impossible and haven't yet recalibrated their understanding of what's possible. Marcus came down the ramp with the careful, deliberate stride of a man whose body was still recalibrating after 10 days of medical attention at Bagram weight, restored by approximately 4 pounds right leg, addressed with a support wrap that the flight surgeon had called temporary, with the confidence of someone who meant it. He looked at Reyes. Reyes looked at him. "You don't know me," Marcus said, "but I know you. Ashley talked about you on the flight." Reyes looked at Ashley. "What did you say?" "That you were competent and occasionally insubordinate," she said. "That's generous." "I thought so." Marcus extended his hand. Reyes took it. The handshake lasted slightly longer than a standard handshake, which was the version of a longer conversation that neither of them had the vocabulary for yet. "The kennel block," Marcus said. "Can we?" "Yeah," Ashley said. "Let's go." Max heard them coming. Ashley knew this because she knew his hearing range, and she knew the specific way his body oriented toward sound before his handler entered his space, but she felt it more than calculated, it the pull of attention from inside the kennel block reaching toward them across the distance like a signal. She opened the kennel block door. Max was already at the front of his crate, standing not barking in the full-body posture of alert recognition. Every line of him pointed toward the door. Ears forward, weight forward. The posture that meant not danger, not stranger, but something that required his complete and immediate presence. He saw Ashley first. His tail moved, not the rapid, anxious sweep of an animal greeting an owner after an absence, but the slow, heavy swing of a dog expressing something that didn't have a smaller word than relief. Then, he saw Marcus. The sound he made was not a bark. It was not any sound. Ashley had a clean category for a low, sustained vocalization from somewhere deep in his chest. The kind of sound that required the full use of his lungs and apparently all of his emotional reserves. He pressed against the crate door with his whole body. Marcus crossed the kennel block in 4 strides and opened the crate. Max came out and went directly into him, not jumping, not the chaotic greeting of an untrained animal, but full contact, shoulder to chest, pushing his entire weight against Marcus's legs and then pressing his head up against Marcus's hands. And Marcus went down on one knee on the concrete floor and put both arms around the dog and his face against Max's neck and stayed there. Ashley looked at Reyes. Reyes was looking at the ceiling with the expression of a man managing something in his face that he had not fully anticipated needing to manage. She looked away and gave them both the privacy the moment required. General Cruz arrived at the kennel block 20 minutes later, which told Ashley that Cruz had been informed of the transport arrival and had decided that 20 minutes was the appropriate interval between the landing and her appearance, long enough to be decent, short enough to communicate urgency. She came in, assessed the room, Marcus on the bench with Max beside him. Ashley standing Reyes by the door, and sat down across from Marcus, with the focused attention she'd brought to every significant conversation Ashley had witnessed her conduct. "Handler 3, she said. "I've read everything Caldwell sent. I've also read the preliminary findings from the investigation into Colonel Hargrove." Marcus looked at her steadily. "And Hargrove filed the KYA report 9 days after Paktika. At the time of filing, 2 of his own intelligence officers had flagged prisoner-taking activity in the compound sector. He received those reports, he signed them. And then he filed yours." Cruz's voice was flat and precise. "There are also communication records between Hargrove and a contractor affiliated with a private security firm that had a competing interest in the specialized K9 program's budget allocation." She paused. "Ghost Pack was expensive. If it succeeded, it displaced contracts worth $32 million annually." The kennel block was quiet enough that Ashley could hear Max breathing against Marcus's knee. Marcus said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was controlled in the way that things are controlled when the alternative is something much larger. "He buried me to protect a contract. The investigation is ongoing. We don't have a complete picture. But that's the shape of it." Cruz looked at him. "That's the shape of it." Another silence. Marcus looked down at Max. The dog looked back up at him with the uncomplicated, absolute attention that dogs gave the people they belonged to, and Marcus pressed his hand against the top of Max's head and held it there. "I want to testify," Marcus said. "Whatever proceeding, whatever forum, I want to be in that room, and I want it on record." "You will be," Cruz said. "Caldwell is coordinating with JAG. The preliminary hearing is in 3 weeks. She paused. "Hargrove has already retained counsel." "Of course he has. His counsel will argue the report was filed in good faith based on available intelligence. His counsel can argue whatever they want." Marcus raised his eyes from Max and met Cruz's. "I was alive. His intelligence officers flagged prisoner-taking in my sector. He knew the report was wrong when he filed it. I spent 22 months in a Taliban compound because a colonel wanted to protect $32 million. His voice didn't rise. It got quieter, which was worse. "I would like the opportunity to say that to someone with the authority to do something about it." 3 weeks, Cruz said. "You'll have it." She stood, looked at Ashley. "Harper, my office at 1400. There are structural decisions about the program that need to be made before the week is out." "Yes, ma'am." Cruz left. The door swung shut. The kennel block held the 3 of them and 17 dogs, and the weight of everything that had just been said, and for a long moment nobody moved. Reyes cleared his throat. $32 million. Yeah, Ashley said. Yeah. He shook his head once, looked at Marcus. For what it's worth, from someone who didn't know you before today. A pause. I'm glad you're here. Marcus looked at him. Thank you, Corporal. Danny's fine. Danny. Marcus nodded. Looked back at the dogs. Tell me about the others. She told me about Max. Tell me about the rest of them. Reyes sat down on the bench on Marcus's other side and started talking about dogs, which was the best thing he could have done, and Ashley listened and let the room be what it needed to be. The 1,400 meeting with Cruz was not the meeting Ashley had expected. She'd prepared for a program structure discussion, resource allocation, training protocols, chain of command integration. Cruz had a folder on her desk and a whiteboard behind her with a diagram on it, which signaled planning rather than deliberation. And Ashley sat down with the specific readiness of someone who had learned to receive large information without letting it reorganize their face. Ghost Pack is being formally reinstated, Cruz said, not as a classified experimental unit, as an official program within the K9 division with its own budget line, its own training curriculum, and its own command structure. Ashley absorbed this. Timeline: 90 days to full operational status. The first training cohort begins in 60. Cruz tapped the folder. I need a program director. Someone who can build the curriculum, run the handler's interface with command, and because this is the military, and nothing is ever simple, defend the program's value to people like Blake every time the budget cycle comes around. Ashley looked at her. You're offering me the position. I'm telling you the position exists and asking if you want it. Cruz's tone was precise. There's a difference. What's the rank structure? Program director would carry a promotion to master sergeant. You'd have direct report to my office. Blake has no authority over the program's operations. That's structural, not a favor. Ashley thought for exactly 3 seconds. Marcus? Cruz raised an eyebrow. He should have a role, not a secondary one. If I'm building the curriculum, I need the best handler I've ever worked with in the room when I build it. She held Cruz's gaze. He's also going to need something to come back to. Something real. Not a desk position while the investigation runs. Cruz considered this. His medical clearance will take time. Then give him a provisional role. Curriculum development doesn't require field clearance. His knowledge of the program of K9 behavioral protocols, of what Ghost Pack was capable of, that's worth more to the curriculum than anything I could pull from documentation. A pause. Cruz looked at the folder, looked at Ashley. Provisional role pending clearance, curriculum development and handler training support. She paused. That works. Then yes, Ashley said. I want the position. Cruz almost smiled. The edge of it just. Good, because I'd already put your name on the paperwork. The hearing came in 3 weeks and 2 days, which was 2 days later than Cruz had said, and felt like 2 days longer than the word waiting could properly describe. Marcus had spent those 3 weeks at Edwards doing exactly what Ashley had told Cruz he would do, working on the curriculum, sitting in on training sessions, watching the dogs with the specific attentive patience of a man rebuilding his understanding of what his body could do, while simultaneously pouring everything his mind had retained into something larger than himself. He was slower than he'd been before Paktika. He said this once, matter-of-factly, not as complaint, but as data, and Ashley said the dogs would wait, and he looked at her with the expression she was learning to read as his version of gratitude, which was not effusive and was not performed, but was completely real. She drove him to the JAG facility herself. He was quiet for most of the drive. She didn't try to fill it. She'd learned years ago that Marcus processed things by going inward rather than outward, and that silence in his company was not absence but presence. He was fully there working through something, and interrupting it was less helpful than it appeared. 15 minutes from the facility, he said, "I've been thinking about what I want to say." "Do you have it?" "I have it. I've had it for about 22 months. He looked out the window. "It's strange. I was afraid the words would be too much, that when I finally got to say them, they'd come out wrong. Too large or too small or too angry." "Are they?" He thought about it. "No, they're just true." A pause. "I think that's enough." "It's enough," she said. Ned. The hearing room held 12 people when Ashley and Marcus walked in, and by the time the proceedings opened it held 14. Caldwell had added a congressional liaison and a representative from the Inspector General's office, both of whom had the careful, neutral expressions of people who had read the preliminary findings and understood that what they were attending was not a formality. Hargrove was at the opposing table. He was older than his file photo, not by years, but by the specific aging that happened to men who had been carrying something heavy and had recently been informed that the weight would not be privately manageable much longer. His counsel was beside him, a woman in a gray suit who held herself with the professional composure of someone who had been briefed on the strength of the evidence and had made her peace with what that meant for the argument she was going to make. Marcus sat down, looked at Hargrove directly. Hargrove looked back. And then, in a movement so small that most people in the room missed it, he looked away, not at his counsel, not at the panel, at the table in front of him. The specific retreat of a man who had been looking at a version of what he'd done through the sanitizing distance of documentation and was now looking at it through the direct, unmediated fact of the man who had survived it. The panel chair opened the proceedings. Ashley sat in the gallery and listened to Marcus talk. He was exact. He was clear. He was not emotional in the way that people expected testimony to be emotional. He did not perform his suffering, did not give them the visible version of it. He gave them facts, sequenced and precise, the product of 22 months of a man doing the only thing he could do to make his situation mean something. And within the facts was the full weight of it present for anyone willing to receive it, which the panel clearly was. He described Paktika, the operation, the compromise, the capture, the 9 days between his capture and the date of Hargrove's K1A report, the 2 intelligence flags that Hargrove had personally signed. He described the compound with the detailed recall of someone who had studied it as both prisoner and analyst. He described what he had understood about why no rescue came. When he reached the part about the $32 million contract, the room was completely still. "I'm not asking this panel to determine motive," Marcus said. "That's not my role here. My role here is to tell you what happened to me, and I've done that." He looked at the panel chair. "I'm asking that the record reflect that I was alive, that the report was wrong, and that the standard of care for handlers and for military working dogs, who are also classified as assets by the same institution that filed that report, requires that we not leave people in the field because it's financially convenient to declare them dead." The panel chair looked at Hargrove's counsel. "Does your client wish to make a statement?" A pause. Hargrove's counsel leaned toward him, said something inaudible. Hargrove shook his head very slightly. "No statement at this time," she said. They drove back to Edwards in the late afternoon. The light was the particular gold of a California day, ending well, which felt almost deliberately kind, given what the day had contained. Marcus was quiet again. A different quality of quiet than the morning, not preparatory, but settled. The quiet of someone who had done the thing that needed to be done and was allowing the fact of its completion to land, without immediately filling the space with the next thing. "How do you feel?" Ashley said. She didn't ask it the way people asked it when they wanted a short answer. She asked it the way she asked Max to hold a position, genuinely expecting a real response. Marcus thought about it. "Like something I've been carrying just got put down." He paused. "Not gone. Put down. It'll still be there. But my hands are free now." She nodded. Drove. "Blake filed another complaint while we were at the hearing." Reyes had texted her. She hadn't told Marcus yet. It could wait. It could wait, because Blake's complaints were going into the archive now, as Cruz had said, and the program had a budget line, and a command structure, and 60 days until its first training cohort. And Marcus's hands were free, and the dogs at Edwards were doing what they always did in the late afternoon, resting with the settled patience of animals that knew their purpose and were ready for it. The first cohort arrived on a Wednesday. 12 handlers selected from across the branches, chosen by a process that Ashley and Marcus had built from scratch over 58 days of argument and refinement, and occasional raised voices, and one memorable 3-hour disagreement about the role of independent initiative in handler training that had ended with both of them sitting on the kennel block floor being observed curiously by Delta, who had decided the discussion was worth monitoring. Ashley stood in front of the 12 new handlers with Marcus beside her and 17 dogs behind them, and the particular feeling in her chest that she recognized from the morning of the fuel depot. Not calm, not the absence of stakes, but the grounded, clear sensation of being exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was built to do. "You were selected," she said, "because you are good at what you do. That's the floor, not the ceiling. Everything you know about working with dogs, everything you've been trained to expect about what a dog can and cannot do. I need you to hold it loosely." She looked down the line of faces. 12 people at the beginning of something. Because what you're going to learn here is that your dog already knows things. Your job is not to direct that knowledge. Your job is to understand it well enough to work with it. She paused. Ghost Pack didn't succeed because the handlers were extraordinary. It succeeded because the handlers learned to trust the dogs the same way the dogs trusted them. That's a two-way channel. Most of the work is learning to receive. She looked at Marcus. He looked back. Gave her the small nod that meant right. She looked at Max, who was sitting at her left side with the unhurried authority of a dog that had been inside a burning hangar through an Afghan mountain range, and into enough significant moments to have developed something that looked functionally very much like wisdom. "We'll start with Max," she said. "Watch him closely, not what he does." "Why?" 3 months later, the first Ghost Pack cohort completed its certification assessment, and 11 of the 12 handlers passed at the highest tier, a number that the reviewing board's written report described as unprecedented in the history of military working dog program evaluation, which was true and which Ashley noted in her own program report without comment because the number spoke for itself. Hargrove's case concluded the same week. The findings were not ambiguous: deliberate falsification of casualty records, failure to act on confirmed intelligence, conflict of interest in program budget decisions. His counsel had argued good faith to the end. The panel had not been persuaded. The rank was stripped. The pension was under review. The contractor relationship was referred for a separate criminal inquiry that Caldwell told Ashley, in a brief phone call, would likely take another year and would likely not end well for the people involved. Marcus was at the assessment when the notification came through. He read it on his phone standing outside the training facility, and then put his phone in his pocket and stood still for a moment that belonged entirely to him, and then walked back inside. Ashley was running the final evaluation with the last 2 handlers. She saw Marcus come in and saw his face and understood. She finished the evaluation. Let the handlers go. Walked to where Marcus was standing. "Done," she said. "Done," he said. She nodded. That was all either of them needed. That evening, she walked the kennel block one last time, before lights out the routine she'd maintained since her first week at Edwards, checking water, checking the animals, the last human contact before the dog settled into the night. Marcus walked with her. He'd been doing this for 2 months, and it had become so natural that she no longer registered it as a change from her previous solitary habit, but simply as the way the evening ended. They reached Max's crate last as they always did. He was already lying down, but opened his eyes when they arrived, looked at both of them, and closed them again with the specific deliberateness of a dog making a considered decision about whether the current moment required his attention. It didn't. He knew where they were. He knew they were whole. He closed his eyes. "He was the first dog I ever trusted completely," Marcus said. Not to her specifically, just aloud. "I know," she said. "I think he knew we were coming, in the compound. I think he knew we'd come." He paused. "That's not rational." "A lot of true things aren't rational," she said. They stood there in the quiet of the kennel block. 17 dogs breathing in the dark. The program alive around them, the record corrected, the debt paid, the work continuing. The kind of moment that didn't announce itself as significant, but was completely in every direction. Ashley thought about the fuel depot. About 23 people on the pavement counting their own breathing. About Blake's face when he'd said military assets, and the way she'd looked at Max and chosen not to answer the way she could have. About the surveillance feed at 0200, and a figure moving through a compound that was supposed to be his tomb, measuring and planning and refusing to give up. About Reyes, who had run into a burning building because she ran into it. About Cruz, who had walked into a kennel block before 0600 and asked the right question. About the fact that all of it, every choice, every risk, every moment where the correct thing and the authorized thing were not the same, had come down to this. To a kennel block that smelled like dogs and clean concrete, and the specific lived-in warmth of animals that had worked hard and rested well. To a program that existed because people had trusted each other enough to do hard things without a guarantee. To Max, asleep, certain of his people. Some partnerships don't just survive betrayal and distance, and the weight of 22 months in the dark, they become, in the surviving, something that cannot be taken apart, something permanent, and proved something that the institution that tried to bury it would spend the rest of its reckoning learning to understand. Ghost Pack was back, and this time it was here to stay.